and Grow Rich. This will be our second episode in this co-hosted series with Bart Baggett, who's absolutely one of my favorite people. He is a transformational coach, an expert in a lot of areas, including forensic handwriting analysis. And Bart is in general one of the most interesting people I met because he has such a wide depth of interests and curiosities in so many fields, from personal development on through even more technical stuff. And Bart and I have been talking for a long time, and we always have conversations that go on for hours that are always fascinating. So we decided, what happens if we bring that on Hack and Grow Rich and do a series where we communicate on there? And my name is Shaahin Cheyene. I am an Amazon expert and Amazon seller. In addition, I am a serial entrepreneur, inventor of herbal ecstasy. And on this podcast, we're going to talk about what comes top of mind to us. And today we had a couple different topics to choose from, but I think we have agreed to go with transformational experiences. Welcome aboard, Bart.
Thanks. And you said such nice things about me. And for those of you that don't follow Shaahin, I think he's the most interesting man in the world as well. A funny story comes to mind, Shaahin. You and I were in a bus in a foreign country. And I believe it was Kuala Lumpur. If I get right, we were in this country, Indonesia. It was Indonesia, and literally we passed a vape store, and I go, "Hey, look, there's a vape store. You know, I've tried that once." And you go, "You know, I invented the vape, right?" And I'm like, "What? Who are you? How is this possible? I thought you were the Amazon guy." And I love that story because it's just so odd, Shaahin. You've blazed such an interesting path. And so those of you that are kind of new to this podcast, you really have two guys here that can hack anything from radio and media to TV to herbal ecstasy to even patents of what you did. And I just want to shout out that I think you're really interesting. The stuff you come up with is crazy.
Well, I appreciate you. Yeah, we started Vape here in the early 2000s, late 90s. And, you know, we developed the core of what was to become vaporization technology and the fundamentals that e-cigs, vapes, all that stuff is built on. I'm no longer in that business. And the funny thing was, you know, in those days, I had a girlfriend that loved to smoke, and I think smoking was disgusting. I still feel that way. I'm not a big smoke person. It's kind of a odious habit to have. And I remember thinking, man, you know, like, we've got how many thousand years of human history, and we are still burning plant matter in order to get just the active elements, but as a byproduct, creating smoke, tar, carbon monoxide, all this crazy stuff. Dude, there has to be a better way. And what I did was what we now teach in Amazon Mastery and all these courses is I said, well, let me not start with the product. I did that before with herbal ecstasy. So let's not start with the product. What I'm going to do is start with the distribution. So I started looking around, and smoke shops existed. Head shops were a thing back then before legalization, you know, where they sold all kinds of, you know, pipes and things like that. And I thought, and I walked in and I said, hey, do you guys have any options? And they had not very many options. So I started experimenting and coming up with the concept of, is it possible to heat up plant matter to where you can get the nicotine, that's, you know, now the cannabinoids, all that stuff, without getting that smoke? And the answer was, yeah, burning it 1200 degrees, right? You ignite something, you burn it 1200 degrees, great. You'll be getting some of that stuff, but you're going to get stuff that's not good for your lungs. When you can just heat it up just enough, I forget what the numbers were, but it was somewhere around 300 degrees. And if you kept that temperature constant, then you would be able to enjoy all the benefits without any smoke, tar, or carbon monoxide. And so that's what we created. And it was amazing because it was really, you know, Bart, it was when you and I talk about blue ocean and blue ocean businesses, you know, this was the ultimate blue ocean. I was building these things in China for about $20 to $40. We were the only people making them. And, you know, some of the others came after us of true digital vaporization. And we were reselling them for $400, and we were selling them as soon as we could get them in. So the second these things came in, they were gone, which was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, you had like movie stars and very famous people just begging you for one of these fancy machines to smoke either pot or cigarettes. I'm not sure if they could do either one, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, at the time, we were unable to sell anything for use with anything but aromatherapy herbs. So what we did was we called it an aromatherapy device, once again, hacking the system. And we actually, so the lawyers went crazy, and they were like, oh my God, you can't do this. They're going to get you. There's all these different kind of paraphernalia laws, and you can't sell. It's, the word bong, you couldn't say the word bong. And so we said, well, you know what? It's an aromatherapy. They said, well, no one's going to believe it. And I said, well, here's what we're going to do. We are going to include with every package a beautiful, so I developed this disk drive system where you could take the discs and you could put the herbs in the disc, and the disc goes into the device. And so we created this disk drive system with all these really nice aromatherapy herbal concoctions that you would get on a disc, and you could basically just put in there. And it ended up being really cool. But, people, some of these dubious people would just pop the cap off and put their own herbs in there. Shocking, right?
That's weird. I wouldn't expect that.
Yeah. And then, the lawyers freaked out more. So I wrote a book, and in the book, we talk about everything that you could use in a vaporizer, except there was one herb missing, strange, that we figured people would just kind of, people got it. We knew what people were ultimately using it for, but we stayed on the right side of the law with that product. And it was incredibly successful. I exited that in 2006, but it was again, I talk about herbal ecstasy, Bart, and how that was like printing money. The cost of a box, a pyramid of herbal ecstasy, was 25 cents all in. That was our COGS, cost of goods sold, for you guys that aren't in the product business. And we retailed it for $19.99. We wholesaled it for between $10 to $15. So just do the math. We were selling hundreds of millions of units. And then with the vaporizer, I wanted to sell something more expensive. So it was $399, $400 for a device that costs us between $20 to $40. And we were selling them all day long with no competition. Would you like to smoke, sir? Would you like to purchase a pipe or a bong? Or would you like to purchase our device? There is nothing in between. And then the competitors came in. And that's when we really had to step up our game. And the company became even more exciting. But this was at a time when, legalization was really nowhere to be seen. But we made a decision. We went out and we acquired patents. We did a couple rounds of financing. There was all kinds of people in Silicon Valley that were excited about that company at that time. And we had some amazing people from huge Silicon Valley companies investing in the company. And we grew it to be the dominant brand in an industry that, once again, I talk about this, create a niche and dominate it. That's one way to wealth very quickly. And you can follow that trajectory with a lot of wealthy people that they've done that part,
They create a niche or find a niche, because creating sounds really hard, or you're way in front of the curve.
So yeah, that's a really good point. So I think there's different levels. So I think what you do is you create a niche, but that niche may be a niche within a niche. So I always talk about kind of a top-down funnel, right? You start at the top, and that's your niche, and then you work your way down, right? So you go down, 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 down into that niche until you've got something that's as blue ocean as you can get, but the market is still big enough. So you can go in there and make a nice cut of money. There aren't too many competitors. The water's blue, right? It's nice. Come on in, have a swim, and you're doing all right. And that's really the formula. That's like the honeypot formula, the secret formula,
Just to clarify for those that haven't read the book, Red Ocean, Blue Ocean, if it's a red ocean, it's full of sharks and blood, and there's too many competitors there. And so now you're going to get hammered, which is, I think, a lot of times happens on Amazon. In fact, you're the one sharking the other people because you're so smart. They're getting into these niches. So the blue ocean is really the word used in businesses, thinks of that book, that would indicate you don't have a lot of competition, or you found a niche where it's big enough to survive and there's just not a lot of people playing in it. And that's been really good for my industries as well, positioning myself as a particular expert. You know, if you take, for example, if we talk about transformational experiences, you know, it's very difficult to jump in and be Tony Robbins. For all you coaches and authors, I mean, that's just, he's been there for 30 years. He literally has had a TV commercial on for 30 years, Shaahin, 24 hours a day in the US. Like that kind of fame is really hard to catch up with. And he's great, right? So what you do is you got to say, what specifically can I do, you know, to get that transformational experience if you're going to be a coach? And that's why one reason I started doing the handwriting analysis. That was unique. It was different. If they came to my seminars, they get a lot of the same transformational stuff, right? Belief systems and habits and all that kind of stuff. But the handwriting was the hook that really no one else was doing, and no one had ever done it on TV. You know, about transformational experiences, I remember going into KISS FM when I was 19 years old and doing a radio show and analyzing handwriting on the radio with this amazing host. And he was, if you remember that movie, the Cheers, you remember Cheers, the TV show? So he was this actor was on that TV show. His name will come to you in a minute, but I was 19 and I was like, holy shit, people are sending me money. They had the mail. Remember that mail, this thing called a postage stamp? They would literally mail checks to my little PO box. My little PO box in Malibu from a radio show. So transformative experience. Like if I hadn't had a friend say, hey, let me get you on this show, I wouldn't have known that that was even a way to make money. Like it never occurred to me that people can make money being a guest. And you did the same trick when you were on Montel Williams, just with a little more zeros at the end.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. You know, we were talking about Richard Koch's book, Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It. Really fantastic book if you guys haven't gotten it. And what Richard does, if you guys are familiar with Richard, he's the guy who wrote the 80-20 principle, which is one of the best business books ever. It talks about the Pareto principle, how 20% of our efforts bring about 80% of our results. And the rest of it is about sort of being able to whittle down the things that are important and the things that are not, and then focusing more on that 20% in a nutshell. And he talks about in his new book about these landmarks that lead to successful people being successful, what he calls unreasonably successful. And one of those, interestingly enough, is transformational experiences. And that's more so what I'm talking about. So, you know, Bart, like you and me talk a lot about gurus, right? I think we're both fans of Alan Watts, right? You're a Alan Watts fan, right?
Sure. And Osho and some other really interesting people that I've had the unique experience to study or be around or go to their ashrams. And I find it fascinating.
Yeah. So have you been to the Osho ashram?
Yeah.
No way. Okay. Well, that's another story. Okay. We're not going to go into that. That's fascinating. That's really interesting. Especially, you know, after the documentaries that are out. Okay. I've got questions on that, but we'll do that off air. So, all right. So you look at these guys, right? And you look at, okay, let's say the generation of Alan Watts, 1960s, he was coming to prominence, right? And then you look at like 1950s, picket white fence, the guy was like a British guy. But you could take 10,000 guys like that, and 9,999 are going to be unsuccessful or moderately successful, right? They're not going to be Alan Watts. I'm not just talking about financial success, but also importance and impact in the world is much more successful. And I think Alan Watts has had a massive impact, specifically by bringing Eastern philosophy to the West. Actually, I don't know anybody who's done more for bringing Eastern philosophy to the West than Alan Watts. I'm gonna go that far. But so you look at these guys, right? British guy, white guy, you know, normal education, was going to go into seminary, you know, middle class family, right? Fairly educated. And then you're like, oh, well, what happened where you became this amazing orator, this unbelievable translator of difficult to understand concepts and make them digestible to an entire generation that is just waiting for this stuff but couldn't understand it, right? If they read the Bhagavad Gita or any of those books, their brain would go to mush, or the Buddhist, you know, books or any of those, their brains would go to mush. Nobody understands that stuff. That stuff is like thick volumes of written in code. But this guy came out and he explained it in a way where every single one of us, every single person I've ever had listen to Alan Watts has gone, wow, that impacted my state and changed my life. Now, the question is, in the example of Alan Watts, what happened? So a lot of those guys were just normal dudes leading this normal trajectory of life. But sometime in that era, psychedelics came around. And I do not espouse the use of psychedelics at all. I am not for them. I am not against them. For me personally, I've had my experiences, and I don't feel that they made me a better person. I don't feel that they were necessary experiences for me personally in my life. I think there are other ways to have achieved those states. But in those cases of those people, even Timothy Leary, people in those cases, it was that experience that just pulled them up out of their roots and changed the very fabric of their reality. For some people, it could be getting into, some type of trauma and a car accident, something happens to them, and that causes them to change, and they're no longer the person that they were. Now, I feel that transformative experience has to be followed, and Kosh doesn't talk too much about this, but by a period of self-reflection, a period of retrospective reflection that then will lead to a epiphany and a change. So for me, the first experience that I had was with meeting my first mentor. And before that was deciding to leave home and getting thrown, into the world with little or no experience about how the world works. That was my first one where I was like, holy, what? Like, my life has just changed. I've got no stability, right? So the trauma of that, the fact that shook me up, Bart, really was like incredibly impactful. And then the second step was meeting this guy. I met a mentor, and I talk about this in my book, Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult, that comes up. And this guy had a transformative experience, several in the 60s, and had become a leader in the civil rights movements. He had, sued the government, by himself and won. He was an incredible human being. And just being under his influence for a period of time was the second transformative experience for me that changed the trajectory of my life. You look at kids growing up in LA, Iranian kids growing up in LA, right? What did they do, right? They went to school, they got married, they became a dentist, they became a doctor. You know what I mean? It's that beat. And if something doesn't happen, some transformation happens, something super impactful, then you follow that trajectory. And 9,909, we are not unique like snowflakes. We are pretty freaking much the same. And every single one follows that trajectory, Bart, unless something happens. Now, you can seek out transformative experiences, which is what Koch talks about as one of his landmarks. He talks about a number of landmarks. One is having unreasonable self-confidence, right? Just this self-belief that's unshakable, which I believe I had, rightfully or wrongfully so. I just knew that I couldn't fail, mainly because I didn't know that I could fail. But in addition to that, it was this transformation, this experience. Now, that happens with a lot of people with travel. Like, I'm sure the first time you went to India, that must, just in and of itself, the first time seeing India must have been a transformational experience for you.
Yeah, 1998. This guy read my book, sent me a fax, remember the fax machines, and paid for me and my girlfriend to go. And we didn't have cell phones. There were cows in the road. They still had the old taxis like in Cuba. And I go back now and it feels like a normal city. But you're right. I literally, Shaahin, had to get a globe and look up where India was because I'm an American and none of us know where anything is on the map. Clearly. So it was so embarrassing, right? So yeah, that was transformative. And not only that, I became kind of a mini celebrity in a foreign land. And that was transformative at 25, 26, having somebody respect you and kiss your feet. And you're like, whoa, this is so, I can't get a phone call returned in America and they're kissing my toes. Oh my God, this is so weird. So yeah,
literally, travel is one of the, right? Literally they kiss your feet.
Literally, they kiss your feet. Yeah, not even kidding. But you were mentioning transformation. I think the thing that I have also come to the conclusion, like Richard Koch, is as I've always wanted to choose when those transformational experiences are, because if you don't choose it, trauma chooses you. You know, if you don't
Mm.
make an effort to go get those experiences, you get a heart attack, you get diabetes, all of a sudden you get in a car, and then you have to, face your demons or whatever that is. I've been very blessed not to have any tragic events that way, but I've also put myself in situations to stretch myself. I've walked on fire, I've scuba dived, I've jumped out of planes, I've done all the things to scare the pee out of me to ask the hard questions. What are we on the earth for, etc. So I've even created experiences for my students because I think, kind of like Tony Robbins, you put them in a safe environment and you can walk across coal. But you know what? You're just not going to come across that in the real world. You're not going to come across a bunch of coals and have to run and save a baby. In Costa Rica, I had an event where I was the host, and it was a beautiful. We'll talk more about how we set that up. But one of my students almost drowned. And it was my event, and there was a big sign that said, "Do not go past this." And I realized at that moment that it was me or she's going to die. And
Mm.
in that moment, and I'm not a super strong swimmer, but I realized it was up to me. I had no choice, and I saved her. And it was such an awesome and bizarre experience to actually see somebody, could have died, and then you did this act of bravery or heroism. In my case, maybe selfishness. It's my trip. What if she dies on my trip? There goes my career, right? You can't go to Baggett's trip. So it was just one of those odd situations where in the moment you make that decision, but normally you're not going to get that chance. So you have to set that up in a room, set that up in a retreat, set that up, and make a decision to put yourself in challenging situations so that you can transform.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, I think certainly it depends on what stage in your life you're talking about. Certainly the potentiality is there, right? Like I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you don't decide, the deciding could be done for you. So just in life in general, that makes sense, right? Like if you don't make decisions.
I think whether you believe in God or not, I think that's correct. They said destiny and stuff, but yeah, whether there's some universal force trying to teach you a lesson or not, you might as well learn it earlier than later.
No, there's a ample number of assholes looking to make decisions for people who do not take an active role in their lives, God or not.
God, government, teachers, parents, somebody's gonna control you if you don't take control. Take the wheel.
The world is full of tyrants. We all know that, right? Dictators waiting to put their imprint on your life pattern. And it's no secret, right? There's people who thrive on that, energy vampires. And I think, look, that's a different topic, but I agree with you. Now, it could happen that you could have a transformative experience without seeking. Now, if you are the type of person that's self-reflective, if you are the type of person that looks back in their life and reflects on things, is it possible? I think this is an interesting question for you to architect your own transformative experience, which is where I think you're going with this. And I think I agree with you. Yes. And moreover, I think travel is one of the most impactful ways to do that. I always think to myself, like, what if you went into the hood, like you went into Compton and you took 7 of the hardest gangsters out there and you flew them over to India and you just put them on the streets? How would they do? Would they come back the same people who went to the streets of Delhi or Mumbai?
I think if you put someone out of their comfort zone and drop them in, they kind of have to change or adapt. They just don't have the same anchors or triggers or mojo or clothes or colors. I mean, it would absolutely be really transformative. I think that's the shortcut is travel. But the bigger picture is, do you really want to put yourself in a situation to stretch your boundaries, challenge your beliefs, have realizations that what you did before may not be correct, and then meet all kinds of people? Like I just think, having gone to India in 1998, like I just see beautiful people, brown people, black people. Like I just see beautiful people. Like I don't even think about the nationality. And I come back and travel through parts of Texas or Arkansas, and I'm shocked that race is a conversation. Like people have all these judgments around the color, and you're brown skin too, as I'm looking right now at your pretty face.
Oh, dare you.
So it's just like it, but if I hadn't have had all those dear friends with all these different color skins, maybe I wouldn't have this perspective, but it would make me sad if I didn't. And some people don't. So yeah, people that don't have a passport, they're going to be a step behind the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's really funny is that most people don't know this. So, you know, I come from a Jewish Iranian family. And what most people don't know is that the Aryans come from the Aryan Mountains. And Hitler, during World War II, um, came out and said, hey, you know, he had done all this research and all this studying on the occult and, you know, what he believed was the Aryan race. And I've talked to scholars about this, which is super interesting. And the Shah of Iran at the time, the king of Iran, decided that, you know, he felt that Hitler was going to win. Bad move. And he decided to become chummy with Hitler. So what he did was he said, whoa, what's all this talk about this Aryan business? We're the Aryans. This is the Aryan Mountains. We are the most Aryan people out there. So we are changing the name of the country to Iran, which means land of the Aryans, from Persia. Interestingly enough, most people don't know this. So technically, you know, the Iranians are the, you know, they're closer to that region. But, you know, it was a period in history where, you know, these, you know, dictators really were making bets. And what was it? It was like Japan and Iran and like a couple of those other countries sided with the wrong side, right?
Yeah, and they toppled their whole economies and their whole world. I'm a little confused on the Aryan. Is Aryan the translation or the name of the mountains? And why did those people think that, is that like where humanity began? And why were they all so white and blue-eyed in Germany, but in Iran they weren't? Is that kind of like our version of a white Jesus with blue eyes and blonde hair? Is it just rewriting history?
So okay, so I believe you know what, I am not an expert about any of this stuff, but I know that the area that, you know, was Persia back in the day included the Caucasus Mountains, right? Which I believe might be where the word Caucasian comes from. So the Caucasus Mountains, the people that lived there were known to have been called the Aryans, which would be like India, Pakistan, that entire area, that entire subcontinent at that time. So, you know, I don't know the details, but it would be really interesting. I mean, we could talk to somebody who's an expert at that. I am by far not an expert at that outside of being Iranian.
and that's true. Most Americans don't know anything about Persia, and they don't know that Iran and Iraq were all part of Persia. And so unless you've got friends like yourself that have a backstory that way, by the way, you're not my first Iranian friend. In college, okay, they had just come back, and Ali Mashaki, great guy, played lacrosse with him. And it was like his family just showed up with nothing on their back. And they're like, you know, we had to get the hell out of there. You know, they changed the name and now we're here.
Transformative experience, buddy. My parents too. You know, they had their life set in Iran. And, you know, my mom was working for Boeing. My dad was working for Coopers and Lybrand, a big accounting firm. They had their life set. You know, they were, my mom was a secretary. My dad was accounting guy, and you know, it was very much so set. And then revolution happened. So I think, you know, regardless of if you make the choice or not, there is that possibility of you're in the ocean and a wave might come, and that wave may be a tsunami, and your ability to ride it out can mean everything, or at least to survive it could mean everything. So this is, you know, it's a good conversation to have, Bart, because, you know, I look back in retrospect at all the transformative events that I've had. And there's, you know, the true transformative experiences, I can say probably were under a dozen, like the big things that happened, right? Leaving home, meeting my first mentor, starting Herbal Ecstasy, you know, subsequent mentors. I think it's probably a dozen, right? And I think included in that, I'm going to say having a kid. Having a kid is definitely a transformative experience. You know, I think when I look back at those, some were good things that happened. Some were traumatic events that happened. At the end of the day, I really feel like I'm thankful for all of them in retrospect. Like reflecting back on that stuff, I feel like it's made me into who I am. And there's a certain toughness, a certain grit that I really don't know how else I would have acquired that rather than having those kinds of experiences. Do you agree with that?
Well, you've probably been to the gym once in your life or two. And if you know anything about bodybuilding, you have to tear the muscle down if it's going to grow back stronger. So if you go to the gym and you never tear a muscle, you really will never achieve growth in that area. And so by stretching and tearing down and putting in situations that actually hurt, you actually come back stronger. So I think what you're saying is exactly true. Now, you don't want to end up dying during these transformation experiences, but you have to continue to stretch yourselves and break down the muscles so the amino acids can come make yourself stronger. And so if you can't choose things like a worldwide pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, none of us chose that, and that was very traumatic. For hundreds of thousands of people died over that, and yet some of us, including myself, our business blew up because I was already so much online. You're in the Amazon space. Guess what company doubled in value during that time? Like, were we lucky? Or I sure didn't see it come. It's not like I had any secret plan, but I happened to be in businesses that would benefit from more online technology and a curve. Was I traumatized? Not really, but will I remember it? Yeah, I think we all remember this past year with great
We're not going to
sadness. Yeah, but I think your response to it is what matters. Some people literally shut themselves in and became alcoholics and didn't write a book and didn't produce an album and didn't do all the things you could have done. And granted, economic had something to do with our ability to bounce back on that. But I do think that we've all had, I think 20, probably, if you talk about the big ones, maybe the heartbreaks, the divorces, the breaking of your leg, crash on your motorcycle, those for sure. But then the ones you chose. I mean, you chose to travel. I want to hear, you started a story last episode about getting shot off the coast of Cambodia in a boat. Was that an intentional adventure or were you really running for your life?
Well, being shot at was not intentional. It was not intentional, but going to Cambodia was, and it was an amazing experience. It was a time in my life where I was looking for adventure, and I was working. Believe it or not, I was done with herbal ecstasy, and shockingly working for some pharma companies who had hired me, big name pharma companies who had hired me to discover new medicines in different natural settings. So I'd gone on expeditions. I was like, this is awesome. I could be like Indiana Jones. And I was doing a lot of traveling. And so when you go to Cambodia, this was one of the amazing things. You go there and they're the nicest people in the world. Again, much like India, they're just sweet people coming from a war-torn country that was destroyed by the work of, a severe dictator and a lot of war. And so, going there, it's amazing because you land and it's this like totally chaotic country. When you get there, everything is like somewhat chaotic. And the people want to show you the history of their country. So the tour guide isn't going to just take you to the like nice beaches and show you the umbrellas. They want to show you the killing fields. They want to show you all the crazy stuff. And so we're traveling, I took a riverboat down the Mekong. They call it a banana boat. And, they showed us, what happened during the Vietnam era. And then you get in a car and they take you to killing fields and there's skulls everywhere. And then I was traveling alone. And a couple of the military guys, the guide said, hey, you want to talk to these guys? And I said, okay, yeah. What do you guys want to do? They're like, hey, you want to come on, the military base, we'll let you shoot guns. And I said, oh, well, okay. Sounds fun. Is that what people do here? They're like, yeah. So we get in this like rinky Jeep and we go down there and we're in this military and they tell us to get down. The dude throws a blanket on top of us. And I was like, at the checkpoint, the thing that goes up and down. And I was like, this can't be good. This cannot be part of the usual tourist experience.
They throw a blanket on you and hide from the guards.
The vibe I got from them was great. So I was like, all right, I'll go with my gut feeling. What's the worst that could happen? And we showed up in there and dude, it's amazing. They're built a cafe in the middle of the military barracks with a menu and everything. This is a legit military barracks. A lot of these guys were former like Khmer Rouge guys, did terrible things, during that time. I don't know if these guys were, but so they have a cafe and you sit down at the cafe and they bring you, tea, food, they have a full menu. And then there's a menu of like weapons that you can fire. So they have, handguns, of course, machine guns. It goes up to the Rambo thing, whatever that is. And then they have bazookas. And then if you throw in an extra $100, they'll put a cow out there. I did not do that.
I'm glad you didn't kill the cow. That would have upset me and all of our Indian friends.
Yeah, it wasn't good. So I walked in there and, the first thing I see is the cutest little Japanese tourists. They were very short, which is why I say little girls. And they were like, typical, back then, the Japanese traveled everywhere with cameras. It's a nation of photographers. And all the girls were like, they had like a M16 blasting in some field, right? And, they would just giggle like this. And they would, like that was the thing that they did. And, then it was my turn and they, gave me the menu and, I did a few of the things and, I thought it was great. And, we paid them. And I think, there was a discussion at the end. I think they knew I was alone. And the discussion was that it was in the local currency, which was, I don't know how much it was at the time, but it was like 100 to 1 of the US dollar. And they were like, no, these prices are US dollar. To which I pointed to the menu and said, no, the prices in the menu are in your local currency with the, symbol of the local currency. And so a little bit of negotiation ensued. I didn't think much of it. And then it became clear that the guide who was with me, that we needed to leave. So I paid in the local currency. I left a little extra for these guys. And we left in a different car in a very fast clip and noticed that these guys were chasing us actually out of where we were going, which I don't know what happened, but we were being chased. And we somehow managed to make it somewhere in a high-speed chase, got onto a boat. And, as we got onto the boat and the boat was taking off, these guys were trying to get us. And so there were some shots fired at that time.
Would it have bankrupted you to pay in dollars, or you just couldn't do it on principle alone?
Oh, it was like, you know what? It was like 1,000 local currency or $1,000. So it was like 100.
Oh, it was the
money. I think
it was big.
It.
Yeah.
I think it was, I think it was very clearly a shakedown.
Right.
Because I noticed they, at some point they changed the menu and they didn't seem aggressive. So at a certain point you're like, cool, like we're cool. I'll just give you a little extra money, right? Like it's supposed to be $20, but I'll give you $100. We should be good. Yep. But I think that opportunity was open for them and they realized that I was a single guy traveling, but that's one of many adventures where I got away like barely.
But they didn't have Google back then, so they couldn't have possibly known that you had sold $1 billion worth of herbal ecstasy a few years before. Like the Google didn't happen. So you now you have a target on your back because they can find out who you are. You're important now. Back then, you just had that look in your eye.
So this is really interesting. So part of what we do, I have a firm now where we do reputation management, where we manage online reputations, and it is so easy, Bart, to hack reputations, to manage your reputation and clean it up. We do clean up for a lot of people. If anybody needs reputation management, reach out to me. We do that. We're a private company, so we don't have a website. We don't do any of that stuff, but we do it under accelerated intelligence for multiple people. And it's amazing how you can protect yourself actually by putting out the right information on the internet and making sure that your profiles are clean. So I think it's a good point, and that's something that's super important. Actually, one of the interesting things that I noticed is I had a guy who wanted to be a client. And this guy was interesting because he really had a hacker mentality. And on every single thing that he wrote or did, he managed to put on there, Bart, that he was a Nobel laureate. Okay. And then it was later changed to the fact that he was a Nobel, what do you call it when they get
nominations?
Nominated. Nobel nominated, right? So that's very impressive. If I introduced you, I said, ladies and gentlemen, this is Bart Baggett. He's been nominated for a Nobel Prize. People would look, right? That's a serious thing.
I'm going to start using that immediately, even if it's totally not true.
I decided to see how easy it might be to hack the Nobel Prize. Not winning it, but just being nominated for it. So what does it take to be nominated for a Nobel Prize? It'll shock you how easy it actually is. So to be nominated, you need to have a former Nobel laureate nominate you. I believe you could have a former person who was nominated nominate you. It could be a person of note on the Nobel Committee or any professor at any accredited university anywhere in the world.
Wait, that's not and, it's or.
Or. Now, for the and you have to fill out some forms. There's some fee, I believe. If I remember correctly, it was very little. It was like a couple $100. So I don't know if you're familiar with the freelancing platform Upwork, or back then I think it was.
I use it all the time, but it's changed names a number of times. You literally hired a freelancer to get yourself a Nobel Peace Prize. Is that where this is going?
This is awesome. I did not. It was for a client. I'm not going to say if we did it or not. This guy already was nominated, but I'm not going to say if we did it for another client or not. I would never stoop to such
tomfoolery,
such brilliance. But you could go on those, on those freelancer websites, Upwork, Freelancer Guru, and you might not find somebody at Stanford or Yale or Harvard who might nominate you, but University of East West Bujumbura, maybe. One of those places, as long as it's an accredited university, which just means it's not an independent university, but one of these accredited universities in one of these countries, and you get a professor who, what salaries are like in third world countries.
Wow.
And, you get him to maybe write a white paper on why forensic handwriting analysis has changed the world as we know it. And he puts in the fee, puts in the application. They don't have to accept it. You have been nominated for a Nobel Prize.
Wow. Does that, and then I can use Nobel laureate? Is that what that word means? Laureate?
No, I think laureate must mean you won the prize, right? I'm not sure.
Well, let's hack winning the prize next time. If Barack Obama has one, I want one. I mean, what has he done that I haven't?
That is true. Oh, and then maybe. We'll have to find out what laureate means. I'm not sure. I think it must mean that you've won. Here we go. Someone who has won an important prize or honor or achievement in science. So in art or science. So I think laureate, you have to win, but we could figure that out too. I'm sure there's ways around it. And, this is the point of like what you and I talk about, what we talk about on Hack and Grow Rich, which brings us to our chosen areas of work. Which right now, coaching people to win on the Amazon platform, and, you coaching people to just in general win in business and life, is that, you cannot think the way we have thought and still win anymore. People always come to me and they're like, oh yeah, I see what you're doing. You're teaching, think outside the box. I say, no, let's crush the effing box. You got to crush the box. It is no longer good enough to think outside the box. You know that challenge that they give with the candle and the thumbtacks, and they say, use this box of thumbtacks to mount this candle to the wall. I've
never heard of that. I've never heard of that in my entire life.
So it's a common cognitive experiment that they do to see how it's done. And, we'll maybe we'll include it in the show notes. It's a very common one. If you look at candle thumbtack experiment, if you look that up, you'll see.
Is it like the 9 dots telling you to draw one line, connecting them, that kind of thing, where if you don't get way outside the lines, you can't make it work?
Yeah. So what it is that they basically give you a box and it's got a bunch of thumbtacks and a candle. And they say, okay, you got 5 minutes, connect the candle to the wall, attach the candle to the wall, mount the candle to the wall. And so people are looking at the thumbtacks. They can't kind of like figure it out. And there's some rules like nothing can touch the table, or it's something like that. And people just have such a hard time thinking about this. And people that are like super geniuses, or kids that don't have all that baggage of bad thinking and bad process, or old thinking and old process, figure it out. What you have to do is you have to use the box that the tacks come in. You tack the box to the wall with the tacks, and you put the candle, and you use the box that they come in as a shelf. That's the
Sounds
answer.
simple. Now you extend it. Wow.
It sounds super simple, but people do all kinds of things. They try to punch a hole through the candle. They try to, make the tack somehow stand up, and they just don't, people don't get it. This drives people nuts, this experiment. So, I use that as an analogy as we approach our final 5 minutes of the podcast, for life in general, Bart, and I think you agree with me, we are moving so fast, and COVID-19 has put us at like the next level in advancement of humanity, of society. Things are moving so rapidly. E-commerce, selling on Amazon, being an Amazon seller, selling online, having your business, having your career, all that stuff has accelerated to the maximum degree, I think, right now at this point in history. And you can no longer count on having a 9-to-5 job. You can no longer count on your career and your credentials carrying you through. You got to have multiple side hustles. You've got to have MSIs, multiple streams of income, like you're doing with real estate. You've got to take that effing box and crush it and come up with something completely fresh. Otherwise, and I'm going to use one of my favorite quotes, and I'm going to turn it over to you for the last 5 minutes for whatever you want to discuss, is that when you are sleeping, and I talk about this in my book, when you are sleeping, your enemies are planning your demise. So it's a very important thing to let sink in. That and the internet makes that even closer. You remember in the 80s, Bart, when we would come up with an idea and think we're so brilliant, and now like you come up with an idea and you Google it and you find out that like 300 million people have thought of that before you.
Yeah, is it the seventh monkey, or what is it? The idea, the concept about the monkeys using tools, but they weren't in the same island, but all of a sudden they had the same idea at the same time. There's something along that line. But yeah, it's disappointing when you realize someone bought your domain 5 years ago and was that far ahead of you.
Yeah. I think what you're talking about is an experiment in critical mass, but it's poignant for what we're talking about now as well, for sure. For sure. So
I love the idea. I see. The thing is, I don't perceive my careers as having massive competition, but I love it when you point that out, because I know I'm paying $10 a click on Google AdWords, and 10 years ago I wasn't. So like I kind of know it, but they're not like in my face. Where you're looking at these Amazon rankings, and all of a sudden this candle versus other candle, like it's very obvious that you have competitors. But I really didn't think about that. That's a really startling and disturbing. I mean, I like my sleep, Shaahin. You've ruined it for me. Now I have to sleep less to worry about people trying to beat me on Google and Facebook and podcasts and all the other stuff we're doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, I'm talking, symbolically about sleep. Like in general, you don't need to sleep. As our good friend Michael Bruce, the sleep doctor, would say, is probably one of the most important things for entrepreneurs. Like you get that really good night's sleep and you just wake up and you feel like $1 million, like everything is reset, is super important. But just don't, it's have a good night's sleep, Bart, but don't fall asleep at the wheel at your business, which I know you don't do, which is why you're the best in the world at several areas that you've achieved mastery in.
Thank you. I want to mention the transformational experiences. You have to sort of choose your mentors wisely, like you and I have. Choose the books you read wisely. That's one way to get a little transferring experience. As an author of books, I don't expect the book to necessarily wildly transform their lives. What normally happens is the book opens their mind. Great, I'm gonna come to a seminar, I'm gonna come to a webinar. Like eventually they're like, wow, I'm gonna get certified in this thing. And they move toward a longer relationship with me. In that vein, if you're interested, the best product that I currently have is called Prism Life Design. PRISM, Prism Life Design. And they've got like a little $300 version and then like the more expensive version, but it takes you through like the self-coaching. And mostly if you're having money blocks, it's the one program I have that can help people sort of shatter their blocks with money. You are the few people I know that seem to come out of the gate just understanding money. Like it took me years to really, I mean, I had fame and I had a lot of success, but like, how do you have 4 or 5 income streams and live beneath? You've really, to me, have been, I don't think it's fair to say that you were gifted that way, but I was a little more retarded with money when I was 19 than you. You seem to have just figured it out. But if you don't have those transformational experiences, you have to go get them. And you can get them through courses and materials and seminars from people you trust, or you can just hope the world gives them to you. And so that's, I think, why you created the Amazon Mastery Program, to create a shorter learning curve for people. And the same thing as I created the life design programs, is people give a shorter learning curve so you could break those belief systems without having to, get shot at off a boat in Cambodia.
Good point. How do we find out more? How can we learn more about the Life Prism program?
Yeah, I think the best website is prismlifedesign.com, or you can always just hit me up on Instagram at Bart Baggett. I'm funny. I was talking to my dad about you today. I was telling him how much money you make on Amazon. He goes, "Hey, well, why don't you do that? He's your friend." I go, "No, I'll pay him. I'll pay him the great." I go, I really want to. I said, I can only have so much bandwidth. Like, I've got 7 companies now, and I really want to have an Amazon product. Leave me with that. What if you're really busy like I am, Shaahin? How much time would it really take to get another product? Because I'm already doing real estate and all the stuff I'm into. Is that an objection you hear? And how do you help people overcome that?
Sure. So yeah, we can actually end on that. So, it's either time or money, guys. So you can do either. If you're the kind of person who has a lot of time, but not a lot of money, of course you can, join our program, our course. We have a mastermind and a group. And for anybody listening to this podcast, we have a free 1-hour course that I encourage everybody to take. So you as well, Bart, anytime you reach out, I'm happy to give you access to that. So just reach out to us. It's FBA seller course, like Frank, Bart, Apple, sellercourse.com, or go to ShaahinCheyene.com under the link course and just reach out there. I'm happy to have a 15-minute discovery call with anybody who wants to see if selling on Amazon is right for you. My goal is really to empower people to succeed in all areas of life, but primarily financially and on the Amazon platform, by creating predictable, recurring revenue year after year. And, by now we've figured out a really nice system for that. It's not perfect for everybody, but for the right people, it could be really life-changing. So if you guys are interested in that, reach out. Also check out my other podcast, Billion, How I Became King of the Thrill Pill Cult. We've got 1 episode up as of today and more coming. And if you want to, you could just reach out to me. My email is public. I respond to every single email personally. You could reach out to me through my website, ShaahinCheyene.com, and we'll include that in the show notes. And Bart, thank you so much for co-hosting the show and being on here with me. And
it's my pleasure. It's always fun talking to you guys. And thanks for listening, everybody. You've been listening to the Hack and Grow Rich podcast with my man, Shaahin Cheyene.
Awesome. Thank you, Bart.